Hey y'all, it's Michael. Welcome to the Frisco Community Church Sermons Podcast, where we explore teachings from the Bible and learn how they apply to our daily lives. No matter your past, background, or where you are in your faith journey, you're welcome at FCC, and I hope the following message helps you draw closer to Jesus. So like I said, we are in a series on Mark, the Gospel of Mark, and we are 5 weeks in. And up to now, there's been no discourse in this gospel. There's been no teaching, discourse, fancy word for teaching. And this is a little bit unique to Mark's gospel. Matthew, a lot of discourse. Luke, a lot of discourse. John, a lot of discourse. Mark, not so much. It's the action gospel. And really what we see is we're observing the actions of Jesus while he was here on earth. And I love the way that Mark does this. And it causes the gospel to move at a breakneck pace. It is the shortest gospel of the four, but there are some areas where Mark goes into much greater detail on things than some of the other ones that are a little bit longer. And so today we're going to be looking at this discourse because, again, it's important. There's only two sections of discourse in Mark's gospel. We got chapter 4 where we're going to be today, and it is all about the kingdom. He is talking about, Jesus is teaching about the kingdom. And then chapter 13, which we will look at in the fall when we do part 2 of this series in Mark, it's apocalyptic. He's talking about the end times and what that is going to look like and what that means for the kingdom that is here and the kingdom that is to come. And this teaching that we're going to look at today is actually all in parables. It's 4 parables actually in total, and we're going to be looking at them. And typically, like a lot of these parables, you've probably heard of them, and you might be familiar with them. But typically what happens with this text, this passage, is we wouldn't look at all 4 at once. We'd look at 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. Maybe we would combine 2 and 3 because they are very related. But actually, all 4 of them are related. So it begs the question, like, why did Mark do this? Why did he structure it this way in his gospel? And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to look at. And if you're not sure or you're not familiar with what the parable is, it's a story. It's a teaching device. It's a narrative device that is rooted in around a story. But it's different than, say, like an allegory or an analogy, something like that. It is actually more enigmatic, means mysterious. There's hidden depth hidden meaning to the parables. It's not normally just sitting there on the nose, so to speak. And that's what probably caused Jesus, if you remember in chapter 1 of Mark, people were blown away about his new way of teaching. And see, up to this point in time in human history, there was no one really known, no philosopher, no giant teacher, no big leader of thought yet that taught in parables like Jesus did. This was really something that is pretty new to human history. So it's probably one of the reasons why people flocked to him all the time. And also, again, the way that these things work is they force you to come to a decision. Like a parable, like if you're in seminary, if you're learning how to preach, really what you're taught is like, hey, give everybody a really clear message so they know what you got, and you're walking away with this, and you got this thing, and everybody knows what they're supposed to know, what they're supposed to do, and how it changes their life. That's not how Jesus preached, man. Jesus would talk, and people would be confused, and they'd be talking about it for days. Like, what the heck did that mean? What? And it causes you to think about it. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at these 4. They're difficult to understand. It's a difficult passage to process. We see Jesus saying some things that make sense. We see things that really make us scratch our head, would have made them scratch their head. We even see Jesus say some things that sound kind of un-Jesus-like. But of course, they're not un-Jesus-like. And then even, it's probably harder for us to understand right now in 2026 than it would have been back then, because so many of the parables that we're going to see today are around agriculture. And we are not an agrarian culture anymore. We are a, silicone and scroll and all that microchip culture. So some of this stuff kind of gets lost on us. And we're going to have to look at it a little bit deeper. And then it's something, again, that's familiar, and there's all kinds of ways that we can apply this. But what we're going to do today is take a higher level look, because Mark is doing something intentional and profound here. 13 times in Mark chapter 4, 1, and actually technically 3 through 34, Mark uses the word listen. 13 times he uses the word listen. And again, for us, we're like, all right, cool, listen. But back then, to a Jewish audience, the hearing, there was a connotation at this time that it wasn't just listen, it was like listen and obey. Follow my example, pay attention, and then put this into work. It was strong language. It was firm and forceful language. And then we also see 3 times Jesus mentions the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. And we're going to look at that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this profound teaching of this rabbi, this young rabbi. And we're going to look at, in each one of these parables, who the audience was, what the purpose of the teaching was. And then at the end, we're going to look back and be like, okay, what is this overall point that Mark is trying to make? And just as a reminder, before we jump into this, Mark's gospel is not written chronologically. So it's very likely, especially in this context, that Mark is taking stories. Remember, Mark was Peter's translator. He did not have one-on-one interaction that we know of with Jesus. These are all things that Mark heard over the years that Peter would share as Peter was out going around sharing the gospel and presenting the gospel, and Mark translated for him. And so it's very likely that the parables that we're seeing here were not all to the same audience, which I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, but also maybe not at the same time. This could be 2 weeks or 2 months, 2 years apart from each other. We really don't know. But again, there's something Mark is doing intentionally here, and we've got to check it out. So, Mark chapter 4, verse 1. We have what is called the parable of the sower. And in the parable of the sower, what we see is an invitation. It's actually verses 1 all the way through 20. And we see actually in this parable that the audience changes. In verses 1 through 9, the audience is this massive crowd. Jesus, as we've talked about, is attracting all of these massive crowds. And the teaching is about an invitation. But this teaching was, again, confusing to everyone, even the disciples, so much so that the disciples are like, hey, man, like, why are you teaching like this? It's hard to understand. Why parables? And so then what happens is we see in verses 10 through 20, or 10 through 12, more specifically, Jesus telling the disciples, hey, this is why I'm teaching this way. And then what he does after verse 12, 13 through 20, is he actually explains the parable to his disciples. And it says in verse 11 of chapter 4, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables. Again, this is Jesus talking to his disciples. And he's saying there's a secret. The word here in the Greek is mysterion. This is the word that Paul uses all throughout his letters, where he talks about the mystery of the gospel. There's a mystery of the gospel. What Jesus is saying is there's something hidden here. There's a hidden meaning in these parables. There is a secret to God's kingdom. And some of these things can be kind of confusing, but they will all make sense in due time. And he says in verse 12, so that they may be ever seeing, but never perceiving, ever hearing, but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. Now, again, this is the thing that sounds very un-Jesus-like, but if you look at Scripture, if you saw on the screens, it's in quotations. And what Jesus is doing is actually referencing a prophecy from Isaiah chapter 6. And what he's saying about Isaiah chapter 6 is, hey, that prophecy is being fulfilled now. And this prophecy that Isaiah was talking about is there is a time coming when the Messiah will come and people will harden their hearts to them. And they aren't going to listen. They aren't going to hear. And that's what Jesus is saying. People are hardening their hearts. But it's go time, because that time that Isaiah talked about is now. It is here. Some of these people, if they're soft of heart, they're going to be hungry and they're going to want to know more when they hear these parables. They're not going to be able to get it out of their mind. But other people are going to be hard of heart. And they're going to be like, whatever, and be completely dismissive of Jesus and his message. It says in verse 13, though, to the disciples, he's like, but don't you understand this parable? How then are you going to understand any parable? Okay, in Mark's account and in Matthew, this is the first parable shared, and it's not the first parable Luke uses. A lot of scholars think this is actually probably the first parable that Jesus ever really taught with. He did use a parable talking with some Pharisees, but the first time that he actually taught crowds, many believe this is the first one. He's like, man, this is the first one. They're only getting harder from here. How are you going to be able to understand it? And he's like, the farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Okay, this is kind of obvious. And he's saying, look, there's a spiritual war that goes on behind the scenes, and Satan is trying to prevent people from hearing. And they're not open to it. They have hardened hearts. It's like a seed that falls on a well-worn path. It's easy for a bird to pick it up. That's easy to pick up. It's easy to clean up. It's harder to find if it's in fertile soil. Verse 16, others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. And what he's saying here is the frivolousness of our thoughts, the frivolousness of what we do, the short-sightedness of human beings. We often let that prevent us from truly fully seeing the forest for the trees. And when times get rough, times get hard, a lot of people bail. A lot of people give up. And verse 18, still others, like seed sown among thorns, they hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desires for other things come and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Jesus here is talking about what the Apostle Paul says is the flesh, the things of this world, wanting to chase and climb the corporate ladder, wanting to be the one who dies with the most toys so you can win. Things like that, lust, things like that are the things that are going to deceive you and cause people to not receive. Verse 20, others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. So the teaching of this parable, of the invitation, is like, look, not everybody's going to accept the invitation. Some will, but there's 4 audiences here, and 3 of them they're not really going to ultimately receive it like the one where they actually bear fruit and grow, and they plant other seed. And then he goes on to another parable in 21. It's called the parable of the lampstand. Now, the audience here is still the disciples. He's basically trying to explain a little bit better to his disciples what's going on. He's like, do you bring a lamp and put it under a bowl or a bed? Okay, so he's asking a rhetorical question. Of course, obviously not. Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears, let him hear. Okay, this is a big statement. He's like, this is a big deal, guys. Pay attention. Again, he's teaching like they would under the culture of a rabbi and then a disciple under him. They would listen to the words. They would do what the rabbi said. It was an apprentice-master kind of relationship, not much like what we have here. And they're saying, guys, you've got to listen to this. You've got to pay attention to this. And of course, what Jesus is saying is like, I am the lamp to the kingdom of heaven. And it is time. I am here. You guys don't understand this yet, but I am the lamp and I am shining it, and it is here for everyone to see. This has not been hidden anymore. For centuries you have waited. The Messiah has come and I am here. There's no more waiting because the time has come. And then the audience shifts and there's a different teaching. Again, we don't know that these all happen, right back to back. Mark is trying to make a point though. And the third parable is the parable of the growing seed in 26 through 29. Again, the audience is the crowd. And it says, this is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Hey, that sounds familiar. We just talked about something like that. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come. A lot of fruit-bearing language here. Sounds a lot like John 15, the vine and the branches. This is going to come up. This is a common theme. There's so much fruit that there's actually enough for a harvest at this point in time. And again, just like in John 15, where he says, I am the branch, I am the vine, you are the branches. You can't bear fruit without me. That's what Jesus is saying here about the soil. He's saying it's not our job to actually bear the fruit. God the Father does that. God the Father is the one who causes the sprouting, who causes the roots to grow, who causes the stalk to grow up. And he is saying that is God's job, not our job. God is the soil in this parable. We are the seed. The sower has no control over what that seed does. And I think that's awesome. I think that's so encouraging because it doesn't matter if the sower is sleeping. It doesn't matter if the sower is out working. He has no idea. It's just down there in the dirt doing its thing because the soil is making it sprout. The soil is making it grow. God the Father is doing this work, and he is always at work, even though you can't see it, even though you can't perceive it because it's in the ground. Again, Mark is doing something here. He is always at work, and it is so encouraging to me. It is so liberating to me to know that my job is to sow seeds. It's not to make the seed produce fruit. That is up to God. And then what he does is he drives the point home with another parable. And this is maybe one that's most popular. Most of y'all know this, whether you're raised in the church, not raised in the church. At some point in time, you've heard about the faith of a mustard seed or how the mustard seed is the smallest seed, et cetera, et cetera. And he continues. Here, again, the audience is the crowds, and it sounds, like I said, very familiar. What shall we say the kingdom of God is like? Or what parable shall we use to describe it? Again, rhetorical question. It is like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds on earth. Now, we have to take a time out real quick because when I was a student pastor, kids ask me this all the time. Some of you guys may be thinking, like, wait a minute. Nah, I've Googled this. There are seeds smaller than mustard seeds. And you're right, there are, okay? Totally are. Doesn't mean that the Bible's not true. Doesn't mean that the Bible has an error in it. What we have to understand is Jesus' audience who was teaching to back then, okay? For whatever it's worth, the small seed. Anybody know what it is? It's an orchid, okay? Back then, they wouldn't have known what an orchid is in the middle of Israel, okay? They wouldn't have known 2,000 years ago what it was. But these guys, these women, it was an agrarian culture, and they had to grow their gardens to help produce fruit. There were farmers, okay? And so what they knew, what they understood was this mustard seed was teeny tiny. And it is actually a highly invasive species. Anybody ever plant mint in their yard and regret it? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You cannot get rid of that stuff. Mustard is the same way. He's just saying it's teeny tiny and it grows into this big, giant 6 to 8 foot tall plant. All of them would have known and understood this. And in their context, it certainly would have been the smallest seed in the world. Yet, in verse 32, when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade. Again, highly, highly invasive. And it can grow 6 to 8 feet tall. His hearers would have been like, yes, I get that now. And so what Jesus is saying, what he's doing right here with his 13 listens and his 3 mentions of the kingdom of heaven is he's like, hey, it's like this mustard seed, which absolutely none of y'all can see, but I'm holding one, I promise. They're 1.5, maybe 2 millimeters at best. And what Jesus is saying is this mustard seed is growing. The kingdom of heaven is growing. And it is going to grow to be something so big that you cannot stop it. It is a mustard plant. The emphasis is always on the mustard seed, but really what Jesus is saying, it's the plant. The plant is what Jesus is getting at. We get so caught up on the seed that it's actually about the plant that grows and takes over the entire garden. And what Jesus is saying is what I'm doing, what I've started here is actually taking over the whole world. And it's growing to be so big that there's nothing you can do to stop it. It will be undeniable. And it's actually a kingdom that will provide shelter, that will provide solace, that will provide refuge for the birds that can perch on it. It's strong enough for people who are weak to go sit and rest. It provides shelter, again, from the sun, from predators. It protects. And that is what he is saying. It is this beautiful movement that over the course of time will be a refuge and shelter to the harassed and helpless. It's a beautiful movement that over the course of time will be a shelter to the homeless, to the immigrant, to the outcasts. It's a place where people can find peace. It's a place where people can find refuge. It's a place where they will be cared for, loved, where the lost, the let down, and the looking can find meaning and purpose in their life. That is what is going on with this little mustard seed. And this invitation to this kingdom is completely wide open. In verse 3, he says, listen, a farmer went out to sow a seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up, all right? We've all been on a nature trail, right? Like at a nature preserve or whatever, we're hiking and walking. We see the packed-in soil on that, right? You drop a seed on that, it's going to be very hard for it to take root, and it's going to be real easy, again, for the bird to scoop it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they were withered because they had no root. Again, this is the short-sighted and frivolous piece. You know, you're not putting in deep roots and you're easily plucked out or you are easily shriveled by the heat. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants so that they did not bear grain. Again, these are people enticed by the things of the world, our flesh patterns, our hurts, our habits, and our hang-ups that we let get in the way of receiving and accepting the invitation. All of these things, he's saying, get in the way of us accepting the invitation. But other seed fell on the good soil. It came, grew, and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, 60, some 100 times. The fourth audience is the one that's bearing fruit. One of the points that he's making is that it's important that we are bearing fruit, but it forces us to make a decision. What he's saying, it causes us to think. What Jesus did, the way he did this, it's incredibly gentle, but incredibly forceful. His people, his audience sitting there would be like, I don't know what's going on here. What is he saying? He's saying not everyone will accept the invitation. Some people are going to be plucked. Some are going to be scorched. Some are going to be pulled because they have no roots. And this is where typically the preacher is going to do the well, what soil are you in, right? We've all been there. I've heard it. What soil are you in? Man, you probably ought to get into other soil. Or, hey, here's a way that we make sure that you stay in the good soil so that you can bear fruit. All heard it that way. That is not the point that Jesus is trying to make with these parables. That is not the point that he is trying to make. Jesus has gone out of his way with the parable of the growing seed to tell us that it's not up to us, it is up to God. We can't change our soil. We fall where we fall. God is the one who sprouts. God is the one who causes the root to grow and the shaft and the fruit to be born. That is the point that Jesus is making with this invitation. And, many of us, if you've been around church for a while, you've heard people say, this really shouldn't be called the parable of the sower, right? You heard that? Does anybody know what people say oftentimes, like what it should be called, the parable of the, starts with an S, rhymes with foil? Soil. All right, a lot of times people say, it really should be called the parable of the soil. I have a different name. And if you have a Bible and a pen, this is what I want you to write in it. It's the parable of the terrible farmer. The parable of the terrible farmer. I mean it. Look at this. This guy's an idiot. No farmer in his right mind would sow seed the way that this guy does, that Jesus just talked about. Does anyone know farmers? Anyone know any farmers? Okay. I have family. Thank you. Thank you in the booth. I appreciate it in the back. I have family in North Dakota that have thousands of acres. They are farmers. They farm and they grow soy. They do wheat. They do corn, depending on all the soy. They would never, ever, ever sow seed like that. Okay. Farming is low margin business. Low margin business. It would make no sense to scatter seed on the rocks or on a well-worn path or in the thorns and the thistles where it's not going to grow and it's not going to sprout, not going to bear fruit, and you can't harvest it, you can't make money. It makes no sense. It is not prudent. This guy is a terrible farmer. He's not farming like a prudent farmer. It's not what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like a 3-year-old helping their mom or dad plant a butterfly garden in the front yard. And there's seed all over the sidewalk. There's some seed in the flower bed. There's seed in the grass. There's seed in the street. I promise you there's seed in the sofa, probably even in their bed, maybe in the dirty clothes hamper. And that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. They're just walking around. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little. The kingdom of heaven is not like some farmer who's sowing prudently. It's like a 3-year-old who's helping their parents grow a butterfly garden. No care, no thoughts about where that seed is landing. The question that I want you to consider today, the question that I want you to leave, the question that I hope plagues you as you leave considering this parable is, how are you sowing seed? Are you sowing seed like a prudent farmer? Or are you sowing seed like a 3-year-old, helping their parents plant a butterfly garden? Are you a prudent farmer or a 3-year-old planting a butterfly garden? Are you only sowing seeds where it makes sense? Are you only sowing seeds where you feel safe? Are you going places that no one would ever think of to sow seeds? Are you going into the thorns and the thistles? Are you going into the well-worn path? Are you going into the rocky places to sow seed? Maybe you refuse to sow seed at work because it's not good soil. Maybe there are people where you're like, they'll never listen. They're just going to get plucked away. So why go? Why sow the seeds there? Who do you think it's pointless to sow seeds with? And some of you may not even be prudent with the seed that you're sowing. You may be stingy. You hold on to those seeds because you're not sowing anything. You're stingy with your seed and you barely sow it at all. As followers of Christ, it is our responsibility, it is our job to sow seeds like a 3-year-old planting a butterfly garden. We are terrible farmers. We just sow seeds like a 3-year-old planting a butterfly garden. Are you sowing seeds like a prudent farmer? Or are you sowing seeds like that 3-year-old? And the beauty of what Jesus is saying here is he's just saying, you just sow, I will make them grow. I will cause them to grow. You don't have to worry about their fruit. Your fruit is to bear fruit. Your fruit is to sow seeds. That's what we do. He is the vine. We are the branches. He will bear the fruit through us. We just toss and scatter the seed. Yes, people are going to reject you. This is liberating. Yes, some people are going to reject you. That's what he's saying. It's okay. Yes, some people are going to deceive you and make you think that they are in the fold, as it were, but they aren't, and they will be scorched. Some people are going to be plucked. And all of that, it's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. You didn't raise your kids wrong if they've deconstructed. You didn't fail your family if they didn't respond to the gospel. You're sowing a seed. And again, as Jesus talked about in this parable of the growing seed, it's sitting there in the dirt, and we have no idea what God the Father is doing behind the scenes. We don't know. We never know when that thing might sprout. It is so liberating. We cannot make the mistake of ignoring the well-worn paths, the rocky places, the thorny and thistly places to sow seeds. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. It is not ideal to sow seeds there. It makes no sense, but that's part of Jesus' kingdom. A lot of times it doesn't make sense. Not ideal, but does God sometimes sprout seeds in those places? Yeah. Absolutely. If you want to go down a wormhole this week on an internet wormhole, just start searching places where trees are growing out of rocks. Start searching places where trees are growing where they shouldn't, okay? There's all over. I mean, I've seen it. You've probably seen them, right? You're like, look at that tree growing out of the side of that mountain. Okay, did you know that there's a very famous tree about 50 miles south of us in the Trinity Forest? It's 150 years old. It's a red oak, and it's in the Trinity Forest. There's a wide shot of it, 150 years old, and it's famous. And it's actually very famous in Comanche folklore. Heidi, go to the next one. This tree is growing out of straight limestone. Straight limestone. It's 150 years old. It's having generations of impact. And if we refuse to sow seed in the rocky places, on the well-worn paths, and in the thorny, thistly places, as well as the places with good soil, we could miss out on the opportunity of seeing a tree like that grow. The invitation to the kingdom of heaven is incredibly broad. It is incredibly broad. And for some reason, we tend to make it very, very narrow. And what I want you all to remember is that in the world full of prudent farmers, I want you to be 3-year-olds. Scattering seed everywhere you go. Every restaurant, every grocery store. You don't have to hit them in the face with a track. You're just scattering seed. And you never know where that seed might take root. You never know what it might do. Never know when a tree might sprout up out of a rocky place. Again, the invitation to the kingdom of heaven is incredibly broad. What we're going to see next week is how Mark shares a story of just how broad the kingdom of heaven is. It made his disciples incredibly uncomfortable. I'm willing to bet it makes some of us incredibly uncomfortable. But what Mark started last week, when he started talking to the Pharisees about the strong man, what he's talking about right now, and what he carries on to next week, he's trying to make even a bigger overarching point that we will look at next week. But for this week, in a world full of prudent farmers, be a 3-year-old. Be thinking about, where are you scattering that seed?
Thank you for listening today. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. If you'd like to learn more about Frisco Community Church, please visit friscocc.org. Until next time, may the God of the universe work with you, in you, and through you. Have a blessed day.